what is ahead in theory is a 4-year cycle that is mirroring the prior cycles. Of course, a prior cycle does not in any way guarantee that you'll see something similar in this cycle, but it still is worth kind of just painting somewhat of a picture here to what potentially could come from a cycle, especially one that sort of somewhat mirrors the 2015 to 17 cycle, or even less so would be the 2018 to sort of 2021 top, which still wasn't a horrible performer by any means. Those two cycles, if they were to play out, sort of point to a $200,000 to a $900,000 or so Bitcoin price in the next cycle. A significant amount of buying that's been going on in anticipation of an approval. Now, I don't have the answer to whether or not it will be approved or not. There are very, very few people that do. But the market feels as if an approval is coming. And generally, with so much traditional finance and institutional money coming in, I get the feeling that this approval is going to be coming in the next sort of 4 to 6 weeks before these deadlines are due. That is my read, at least, of the tea leaves, and that's what the market and the price action, I believe, is telling us. And people have said, well, isn't that going to be sort of a sell the news event? Isn't that priced in? And my thinking is no, it's not, for a number of reasons. One, when you look at where we stand in the 4-year cycle, here's the monthly chart, which, by the way, is just picture perfect, running to script, as good as you can get, essentially, with now just 9 to 10 months in from the last 4-year cycle. So we're in the most advantageous sort of phase of a cycle, of a long 4-year cycle. So the tailwind is behind this market. So when you get extremely positive news, something like an ETF approval that really has been 10 years in the making, we've gone through kind of these ETF is coming narratives many, many times over the cycles. But if it were to actually arrive this time around, I think what's different this time around is that in the past, back in 2020 and 2017 and other periods where we talked a lot about an ETF approval, I don't think the general market was in a position to embrace an ETF wholeheartedly, whereas it is today. When you look at sort of some of the traditional financial news media, and you look at CNBC, for example, the narrative towards, or the view and the sentiment towards Bitcoin by not just the analysts and the presenters, but essentially anybody that comes onto these shows, there are very, very few skeptics anymore for Bitcoin. Most either have a neutral stand or a very positive and bullish stand. Of course, that's because they see the potential for themselves and their traditional firms, institutional firms, to take advantage of this. But that also extends more broadly to the general population. I think now Bitcoin has achieved a level of awareness and has moved from kind of that scammy, fake internet money kind of viewpoint that everybody held to, yeah, this actually makes some sense. I understand it, and it's been around through boom and bust cycle now 3 to 4 times that it's legitimate. And the reason I bring this up is the environment is ripe where if these ETFs get approved, that the follow-on capital inflow, the ability for wealth managers and investment advisors, for example, to convince their clients to allocate some of their funds towards Bitcoin is now in place. So seeing these get approved, I think also means that it will be followed by real and significant inflows into the space and into Bitcoin that will help drive this up. If this cycle plays out like the prior 3 cycles played out, then we've got almost 2 years of a bull market ahead of us. It's a very, very long time for you to remain disciplined and patient and in that position, with the goal being, and I said this very thing in that last cycle, with the goal being of just sitting in that position and focusing on that upper box right there where the timing for an expected next cycle will occur. That would be the easiest path. Now, there's nothing easy about holding a position that you got in at 3,500 or more recently 17,000, and now seeing Bitcoin trade in the $100,000 range and possibly 200,000 and jumping by $5,000 or $7,000 in one daily candle. That's not going to be easy. The difference here might be with an ETF approval is it might provide the type of FOMO that could drive this monthly chart up sharply and quickly and early. And I do think that's a possibility right here, that if we were to see in a very short period of time Bitcoin go up and make an all-time high well before even, say, the halving or the midpoint of this 4-year cycle, then that to me would be the most difficult scenario to invest or trade on, because it doesn't fall in that expected window like it has in the past. So to see Bitcoin over the next just a few months, so for example, here is sort of your 4-year window. If you go to sort of that 24-month period, you get to November of next year. That's the midpoint of the cycle. So Bitcoin here should not be making a new high above that sort of $70,000 range before this November high. In prior cycles, it took 26 months to get to a high. And in this cycle, it took right there, 23 to 24. So right at the midpoint. That's essentially roughly where Bitcoin should be making its new high in the cycle. If it gets there well before that point and well before the halving, say, for example, by February or March of 2024, within 14 to 16 months from the lows, then that is far too bullish, far too quick. That would have the profile of a blow-off move or a left-translated cycle. So again, it's way too early to even really worry about this. We would worry about this, I would say, by around January, if we saw this current candle and maybe next month in December come up towards sort of 49.50, which I think on an ETF approval would be expected. But we should also see that shakeout, that volatility event in the following month in January, bring it back down to earth somewhat, shake people out, and then also then resume a more normal path forward. If it were to shoot up to 50,000 in the following month, shoot up to 65,000, the following month shoot up to 100,000 as an example, that would be the very character of a left translated cycle. Again, that would make it very difficult because you just don't know whether or not over just 6 months from there and say by the summer of next year, you're at 200 or 250,000. You just don't know where that top in the cycle would be, and would make it very difficult. It's much better to have a cycle make and push big FOMO, broad bull mania in this window, because it makes it easier to then make the assumption that the final leg of the bull market is in place. So we're going to be watching out for that in future videos. Again, a little bit early to tell, and how it responds to any positive ETF approval is going to be very important here in determining whether or not a left translated cycle is in place.